Welcome back to Thoughts on the Crossfire. My name is Andy, and I messed up pretty bad. It wasn't necessarily that bad of a mess up, but then I made a lot of videos based on the fallacious argument, and that means like half my channel is actually wrong. So that's fun. I don't think it's quite half, but a lot of my videos are based on this one, and this one's wrong. It's pretty wrong. Let's get into it.
The history of morality is, to say the least, extensive, and I don't think that I have come up with some sort of master solution that nobody's ever thought of before.
You're right there.
What I do have is a justification for an ethical basis on which I can actually make scientific, falsifiable claims about what ought to be done.
And that is not right.
So first I want to talk about why we should even look for an actual ethical basis.
Okay, so here's the deal. My reasoning for why we should look for an ethical basis still holds. I still think that's right, and I've actually expanded on that quite a lot. I now have 2 videos that total in like 22 minutes. I only spend about 3 minutes talking about this in this video, but I've actually made a lot more content about it, and it's my wager of effective odds. And it's been made before. There's a paper that I still haven't actually read all the way through, but it's been proposed before, very similar idea, but it's basically the idea that we can maximize our chances of doing what's right by acting as though there is something to do that's right, and if there isn't something to do that's right, then it doesn't matter either way, so it's kind of a statistical thing, and so no matter how low the chance is that something actually exists that is right, that oughts actually exist, we should still act as though that's the case, and I still think that's correct. However, the second half of this video is actually arguing from that down to a practical basis, or at least a basis that we can apply and then get practical methods out of, which is the maximal fulfillment of desire, and that is, that's where it breaks down.
We think we should have a framework. Where do we actually get it from? How do we actually figure out what it should be?
It's a good question.
Ethical answers are falsifiable. That must be the case.
So I'm still on board with this. Ethics needs to be falsifiable if you want it to be real, and that is part of the original wager, which is that we should assume that ethics is real in informing our actions. So yes, you would need to say that it is falsifiable. Still on board with this, but let's continue.
This need for being falsifiable is why I say that there must be a source, because I think the only other option besides having a source is being arbitrary, and obviously being arbitrary, it cannot be falsifiable then. Maybe I'm making a black and white fallacy in saying that it's either arbitrary or it has a source, but I don't think so, and maybe I'm wrong about that, so let me know if I am.
So, past me, I don't think you're wrong about that point. I think you're wrong about the next point you're about to make, but that point, that it needs to have a source rather than be arbitrary, and that is a true dichotomy, I'm still on board with that as well. The wording I used wasn't quite right. I should have just said it needs to be sourced rather than it needs to have a source, because I don't really know what a source means. If you have multiple sources, you could just say they are a group, and then say, well, it's actually one source. You know, humans have brains that are split into 2 pieces, so is that 2 sources or 1 source? You know, like, it feels like, oh, it's 1 source because it's all one cohesive thing, but how do you define what a cohesive thing is? It's complicated, so basically the idea is just that you need to be informing ethics with something, and the only other option is that it's arbitrary, and that obviously is not falsifiable. So yeah, I'm still on board with this point that it needs to be sourced rather than arbitrary, but the next point is where we have a little bit of contention.
So I assume that there is a source. So then we say, what is this source? So there's 2 options. Morals can come from not us, or they can come from us. So, which is it? Is it not us or is it us?
So here is the first false dichotomy. I say ethics must be sourced from either us or not us. And who in the world is us? You know, that dichotomy might be a true one, you know, because it's an X or not X dichotomy, which is generally true, except for the fact that, of course, it's not actually the case that morality needs to have a source, like I just said a minute ago. It's the case that morality must be sourced, which could be multiple sources. So it could be both. It could be sourced from both us and not us. But what does us even mean? Does it mean moral agents or something like that? Because that's an assumption that you're bringing in that's not justified. So this is a false dichotomy. This is the first place where this argument breaks down, but there will be more, so let's continue.
There's no evidence for not us giving us morals, even if something like, for instance, Christianity was true. Let's just, for argument's sake, say that all the ex post facto explanations work and that all the contradictions are somehow justified. Let's just take Christianity as true for a second. You still don't have any kind of objective framework because people all over the place that all claim to prescribe to the same text and the same God disagree about really big things morally. So it's not a rigorous framework. So even if that God exists, he's not doing a very good job at communicating what these morals actually are. And for that reason, we can't have free will to actually follow them.
So there's a lot there to unpack. We'll start with the fact that I continue the false dichotomy trend by narrowing the definitions of us and not us even further implicitly to like some sort of, supreme being. Really, I'm thinking about God there, right? So I'm thinking like, oh, the options are God or, self-sourced or secular humanism. Oh, wow, okay, so I'm narrowing it down to those two options, when of course that's not justified. That's not a justified dichotomy. It's completely possible to have a falsifiable ethical framework that is based on some random object. I could just say, you know what? The goal in all of this, okay, is to make a really long duct tape roll. Okay, and the longer you make the duct tape roll, the better. Okay? That is a framework where you could make falsifiable claims about what's ethical and what's not ethical if that's your ultimate thing, right? Because there are actions which will contribute to making that really long duct tape roll, and there are actions which will be detrimental towards that goal, and you can make really true and really untrue claims about what you ought to do in that framework. There's absolutely no reason why it has to be either us and our desires or some higher power and its desires, if the only thing that we're actually trying to fulfill is the idea that ethics must be falsifiable, which is the only premise that I've actually set up that we're trying to fulfill. So really doesn't work there. Another issue that arose here, which was, it wasn't even relevant to the argument, but I just managed to slip in another fallacy where I said that, because different people around the world interpret Scripture differently, the Scripture is not objective. What? That's so dumb. Why did I say that? How did that get past the editing stage? I don't know. I feel like maybe it was something where I was thinking, you know what, I did make a mistake there, but I'm too lazy to go back and refilm it, so I'm just going to keep it in and hope nobody notices. Well, future me relative to past me, meaning current me, noticed, okay? So you ain't getting away with it, all right? Now, I still don't think that the Bible is actually a good objective framework because I don't think it's well-defined. I think it does not have well-defined ethics, but the idea that it doesn't have objective ethics because different people interpret it differently is totally wrong. People can just get it wrong. They can just interpret it wrong. That's a totally possible thing. So anyway, that's another issue.
We are our own moral source, our own moral authority. Now this is perhaps the biggest jump I make, and the jump that I am most uneased about. The jump from a moral source to a moral authority. But I think it's a necessary one, and I don't think it's that far of one, but it might be. So please let me know if there's an issue there.
A little ironic that that's what past me was most uneased about, because that's actually totally good. Going from a source to an authority. If you have thing A, and thing A fully informs, or is fully the source of outcome B, then it is the authority. If nothing else affects B except for A, because A is the full source of B, then A is also the full authority. If anything else was authority over B, then A could not be the full source. So yeah, actually that point is totally fine. It's the point before that that had a lot of issues. So basically what I go on to say after this is all pretty fine, but it's based on an argument that doesn't work, so it's not right. And basically what I've just taken away from this video is that I went into this with the intention of I was trying to find some sort of basis which was actually justified, as opposed to some basis where you just say, let's maximize well-being. Let's make that the axiom. Why? Well, because we feel like it, I guess, and everybody feels like it, therefore it must be true. You know, you say something like that, and I wanted to get away from that. I wanted to actually have a base. I wanted to actually have reason behind a moral framework. And so the moral framework turned out a little bit differently than normal, but it was still totally wrong, and I totally did all of the things I was trying to avoid, namely, unjustified anthropocentrism, which is, just like taking everything and anthropomorphizing it, I guess is another way of saying it, but it's on a philosophical level, so that's not exactly the right term, but basically taking ideas and putting human intuition into it, the intuitions about things like the self being a coherent and cohesive entity which is fundamentally separate from the rest of reality, which is not actually a justified assumption, and just all sorts of things where I was assuming black and white fallacies all over the place, right? We assume, oh, it has to be either God and his desires or us and our desires. And specifically referring to, life when I say us and our desires. But I'm bringing all that in there, and in a sense there was actually basically a tangential begging the question fallacy, because the way that I kind of processed that logic implicitly, so it was an implicit tangential begging the question fallacy, because the way I was processing that dichotomy of not us and us was one where I was kind of already assuming the framework of desire and the fulfillment of desire as a basis for oughts, which is something that I didn't actually get to until later in the argument. So all sorts of problems with it, and it's not a surprise that I got it wrong. I'm 17, of course I got it wrong, but the surprise to me is the way in which I got it wrong, which is exactly the way I was trying to avoid. So I guess the lesson is just be more careful and be more aggressive towards yourself. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. The title is a little tongue-in-cheek, but to be honest, I am feeling a little bit like I can be more aggressive in this video, especially because I'm arguing against my past self as opposed to anybody else, so I don't have to worry about hurting feelings or whatever. And hurting feelings is not necessarily something that should bar you from discussion ever, but it's something that if you can avoid it, why not? But in this case, past me doesn't exist because current me exists. I don't know. That's a whole nother discussion. Does the past exist? And if the past exists, does the future exist? All right, we're getting a little off track here, but that was the refutation of my old thing. There are a lot of videos that are based off of this. My murder video, my abortion video, and then obviously this video, and I think a couple of others as well. So there's a lot to rethink, and really I only realized this flaw and stuff a couple of days ago, so I haven't really thought through big issues based on the new thing that I've been thinking about, which is basically the only ought that I really know at this point is that we ought to seek the truth of ethics. And that comes from a consequence of logic, which I will talk about next week. I will talk about next week why we should seek truth, which was actually my first video, and it's very similar logic to my first video, but I'm going to go a lot more in-depth on that. And yeah, I have so many ideas. I have months of content in terms of the ideas I have right now, and I can't wait to make all of it. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to discuss this, I don't know, maybe you think I was actually right in the first place, or something like that, but if you want to discuss anything with me, go ahead and type some stuff in the comments, and let's have a discussion. That's what I made this channel for. Okay, thank you for watching. See you next week. We'll talk about why we should seek truth. Thanks for watching.